listening to the recording, so I can't complain about anybody else.
He wasn't going to make it anyway.
Leaving it. Got it.
All right, let's see. Can somebody shut that back door, please?
Right here.
So we are, we're going to jump all the way to Matthew 26 today.
We were there last week.
We're supposed to say that, Bill. All right, chapter 26, we are at verse 36. So let me just say a couple things as kind of introduction to today. So we're going to be looking at Jesus's prayer in the garden, and I don't know how to exactly say, but somehow we've got to realize that this prayer is not only unusual but striking in the life of Jesus, and we're stepping into a kind of a private scene that he is. We'll see that he's told the disciples to kind of stay at the edge of the garden. He's invited a few of them close by, and then he goes off by himself for this prayer of sorrow. So I just want us to recognize that we're kind of, we're stepping into holy ground. We're stepping into a sanctuary, really, where Jesus is having this prayer. And I just want you to consider that as we go through this, that this is a pretty serious and pretty impactful. So yeah, yes, we're going to have some lessons we gain out of this, but frankly, I mostly want you to get out of this just the impact that this has on Jesus, and just the tough situation he is in the midst of here in this time. Anyway, okay, so let's get started. Verse 36. It says, "Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, 'Sit here while I go and pray over there.'" So just remember where we were, right? We had the Lord's Supper. We then had the disciples leaving Jerusalem, going over to the Mount of Olives. They're now walking up the Mount of Olives. They get to this place called Gethsemane, where the word Gethsemane actually means olive press. So no, we're not sure whether this is the name of a garden or the name of a little town. It doesn't matter really. It's the, we know it as the name of the garden. But it's obviously it's an olive grove, right? That they have come upon. He tells them to sit here while I go over there and pray. Now, what do you think Jesus's expectations of the disciples are as he tells them to sit there while I go over there and pray?
That they would be praying also?
So, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I will say that in Luke's version of this, he says, "Pray that you do not enter temptation," is the first thing he says before he leaves them here. So yeah, his expectation is that they're going to pray. Why? Why would he have that expectation? What would they be praying about?
Told them multiple times what's happening, so he thinks he's informed them of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, again, they ought to be pretty broken up about, he is going to die. He's going to die. He says it's going to happen now. And by the way, he's also just told them, "You're all going to deny me." I mean, they ought to be just overwhelmed with that, and just going to prayer to deal with that. So that is no question. That's his expectation as we get into the rest of this. All right, so let's keep going. In verse 37, he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. So he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. Who were the two sons of Zebedee?
James and John.
James and John. So Peter, James, and John he takes with him. Why does he take them with him?
They're his inner circle.
They're his inner circle. And let's remember, he's taken these three to other places before. Do you remember where he has taken them before?
Mount of Transfiguration.
Yeah, if you go back to Matthew chapter 17, we don't need to turn there, but you'll see there when he goes out to the Mount of Transfiguration, it's these same three, Peter, James, and John, that go with him. And then there's another story in Mark. It's not captured in Matthew. At the raising of Jairus's daughter, he also brings in Peter, James, and John into that. So these are people he has a special relationship. This is his tight-knit circle. But beyond them just being his tight-knit circle, why do you think he brings them into this particular event?
Witnesses?
Witnesses, I think, is one reason. Yeah, right. Someone to tell the story, someone to hear what happens and be able to record it. Why else?
I keep thinking of Sons of Thunder. Maybe they were bodyguards to some degree.
Maybe, but not in the sense that you're thinking of it, Russell.
These three become leaders in the church.
Yes,
And
I think that's true. I think there's no question. This is, for them to learn, for them to to understand and carry that on as they become leaders. Yes. Why else would he invite these three into this event? Go ahead, Hugh.
Oh, I think they're closest to him. His friends. He wants just simple fact that he wants comfort from his closest friends, maybe. But
yeah, I think that's exactly the other thing, right? I think he knows he's about to do battle. He knows he's about to go into this time of prayer, and he wants some friends. He wants some encouragement. He wants some people who has been through some stuff with him before, right? Who can stand beside him, who can help him, who can encourage him, who can say, "You go, Jesus," right? In the midst of what he's about to enter. I think that's exactly one of the big reasons why he brought them in. So look at the end of the verse, right? It says he took with him Peter, James, and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. So he sets most of the disciples on the outside. Frankly, I believe he didn't think they could handle what's about to happen. He hoped that Peter, James, and John could. He brings them inside. And as he does, he gets hit with sorrow and deep distress. What's interesting is that if you look at different translations and if you look at the commentaries, the words here just don't carry the impact of what Jesus was feeling. I mean, other words that they use are grieved, distressed, pressed down, in anguish, overwhelmed. His mind was in horror, amazement, anguish, swallowed up with terror and dismay, a deep sadness, a desolate loneliness, depression. So he is here knowing all that has happened and all that is to happen. And it comes down him as a weight, right? I just find it interesting. He begins, as he walks into this garden, he begins to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Again, I think it just kind of whacks him in the head what is about to happen. Now, he has a lot to be sorrowful for, right? I mean, he's had some stuff happen in his life, all the way from his early life, being driven out of his home, the death of Lazarus, again, a good friend of his, him looking upon Jerusalem and just weeping over it. I mean, his sorrow just over the Jewish nation itself and his response to him. Certainly, we've just seen the sorrow over Judas and his turning on him. His sorrow over the disciples again and again and again, not getting it. His sorrow over the religious leaders, his sorrow over the physical abuse he's about to undergo, right? He sees what's going to happen. He sees how he's going to be treated. He knows that he is going to die. All of that, I think, comes upon him as a big, heavy hammer. Now, I say all that, and then I want to contradict that and say, well, you know, there have been many martyrs who go into that martyrdom with rejoicing, with a feeling of great honor. So what's the difference between what Jesus is going through and what any old martyr has gone through?
It's not even close. I mean, he takes on the sins of the world. We can't even comprehend that.
Right, exactly. And I think we, you know, sometimes we get wrapped up in the physical stuff that he goes through, but again, as CT has so well said, compared to the weight of the cross, the weight of, you know, on him will lay the iniquity of us all. That stuff is not even in the ballpark, right? I mean, the judgment for sin and death. This is the Holy One oppressed by sin. And it's also the weight of sin's consequences, right? All of it laid on top of him. The wrath of God being thrown at him being forsaken by God. This is the stuff I think that brings him to this point and smacks him in the head, and he begins to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And again, that's so not appropriate for the sorrow and the level of sorrow that he's in. So look verse 38. It adds a little bit more here to help us. It says, then he said to them, my soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. He's overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. He's engulfed with grief enough to kill him. One of the commentaries brought this in. I thought it was good. It says, you know, Jesus created this body and he knew what it could handle. And he knew at this point he's on the edge of mortal destruction because of the grief, the sorrow, the sadness, the depression, just the weight of everything that's going to come on him. He knew this body was on the edge, was near death because of that. If you look at Luke's version, we won't look at it right now, but it's Luke 22:44. You remember that it says at this particular time, he begins to sweat drops of blood, right? And the medical people tell us very likely when you're under that kind of extreme pressure, the capillaries can burst and that your blood can actually come out in your sweat. So this is not medically unlikely. It's actually medically likely for the amount of stress and amount of pressure that he's under as he thinks about what is coming in just a few hours. We're only hours away at this point, right? The other thing that Luke adds is that there appeared then an angel to strengthen him. I think this was an angel to keep him alive, an angel to make sure he doesn't die here. It's not time for him to die. That's got to come a couple hours later. And I think he was just thinking about what was happening, the pressure of that, the overwhelming nature of that brought him near death. It was breaking his heart, both figuratively and literally. We're going to come back and talk about the disciples. I want to go through this twice. Once just talking about Jesus and what he's going through, and then come back and look at the disciples. So let me come back to the end of the rest of verse 38 here in a minute. So let's go on to verse 39. It says he went a little farther and fell down on his face praying. So he leaves the three, Peter, James, and John, and goes on a little farther. Luke says that it was a stone's throw away. So it was far enough, but it was still where the disciples could hear what was going on. Because again, he wanted them to hear. He wanted them to be with him and part of it. In Mark's version, so here it says, "Oh, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will." Again, in Mark's version, it says, "Abba, Father," right? This is a very personal expression. You know, is there any other way, Father, that this can happen? He still recognizes that the sin has to be paid for, right? That has to be done, that this task has to be completed. But I think what you're seeing here now is the human side of Jesus saying, is there any other way that this can happen beyond this whole weight of eternity being laid upon my head? Is there any way that this cup can pass? And of course, this cup is a picture we've seen before. In fact, it was back in Matthew chapter 20 where the disciples were talking about his end, and Jesus says that you will drink my cup at some point, right? You will drink my suffering. You will suffer. You will die. And Jesus is saying here, is there any way that this suffering, and I don't think, again, he's talking about the physical suffering. He's talking about the weight of immeasurable sin and immeasurable consequences that are going to be laid upon him on the cross. And then he says that almost amazing thing, right? But not as I will, but as you will, which is a fascinating statement, right? So not as I in my human self will, but as I in my eternal self will, right? I mean, the tension here between his human self and his godly self here is amazing and fascinating. But so he's definitely saying, this human self says, I don't know about this whole cross thing, and I don't know about all this suffering stuff. But I do understand that this has to happen in order for what you have said, and for the whole redemption element to occur. I do want you to turn to John chapter 12 for a minute and see another verse. In John chapter 12, it's, again, I just want you to get a picture of Jesus here that's just amazing. John chapter 12, verse 27. John 12, 27, right? It says, "Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Right? I mean, just wow. He's recognizing this is why I came. This is my purpose. This is what it's all about. Even though I'm troubled, even though I'm sorrowful, even though I'm overwhelmed. All right, let's go back to Matthew. The next thing we see in verse 42, it says, "And a second time he went away and prayed." He goes back into the garden. He says, "Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass from me unless I drink it, your will be done." So here we see a little bit of different, he's not asking that the cup be taken away. He's recognizing that this cup has to be taken by him. If this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. It's a little more resolve there. Now, let me ask this question right here, though. Why did he go back and pray a second time? He's already prayed. Why did he go back and pray a second time? A hush comes over the crowd. All right, I'm not going to answer that question. We'll keep going. I want you to think on that question because look at verse 44. Verse 44. "So he left them, went away again, and prayed the third time saying the same words. In other words, saying what he said back in verse 42, "Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done." So a third time, he goes back and he prays the same thing. Why does he go back a third time?
Isn't it that he just wants to be in constant thought and then communicating this time? I mean, what like his mind is that.
It's getting closer. Time goes on.
Yeah. What's going on? What's going on in the garden as he's praying? What's going on?
Others
The
are
disciples
asleep.
keep going to sleep.
Yeah, they're sleeping.
Forget the disciples. I don't care about them.
Marshall.
What's going on with Jesus?
He's probably being tempted to not do this.
It's the flesh being weak, and that's why he keeps telling the others about, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak.
Yeah, he after he goes through what he goes through, he goes and tries to say the same things to the disciples, try to instruct them. But yeah, he's going through what I think we need to recognize here is he's going through temptation. 3 times. Remember that? Remember in the wilderness, he gets tempted by the devil 3 times. Here again, he goes back 3 times to pray. Why? The devil is saying, "Hey, Jesus, are you kidding me? You're the Son of God. You don't need to go through this. Certainly God can do this some other way. I'll bet he could just kind of wave his hand and blah, blah, blah." And Jesus is saying, "No, your will be done." Right? Not what I want, not what I want to say, "Hey, God, let's do this some other way. Let's try some other way to do this." Jesus is being tempted in the wilderness. Satan is battling him in that garden. There's a battle going on there, a fierce battle. And he comes back the first time, and the battle's not quite through. He's got to go back again. He comes back the second time, and the battle's not quite through. He's got to go back again. This is real prayer. This is real battling prayer. This is where real wrestling against Satan, wrestling against the flesh, right? This is real prayer. This is not just a lesson for the disciples. This is a real struggle and battle going on. He is bleeding drops of blood. He's sweating drops of blood over this.
Hey, Rich, I think a great visualization is a Passion of the Christ. It shows him in the garden and Satan kind of walking around him, belittling him. And it just encapsulates everything.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the right picture. That's exactly what's going on. And we kind of see this as kind of, oh, isn't this a nice prayer that he's going to? He's just hanging out with his friend. No, this is a monstrous battle. He is being gripped. He is being thrown around by Satan. This is where we see the weakest his flesh ever is right here, as Satan is attacking him and tempting him and pushing him and trying to get him to go against God's will. And every time he comes back and says, "Thy will be done, thy will be done, thy will be done." By the way, every prayer should end in that way, right? Thy will be done. Yes, Lord, I want this. I need this. I need you to do this, but thy will be done, right? The battle here is about getting Jesus in line with God's will, getting the human part of Jesus in line with God's will. And frankly, that's what most prayer is about. Getting us in line with God's will. Getting us in line with what God is doing and us being willing to say, "Thy will be done." So don't miss that. That's the big deal here. That's what this is all about. All right, now let's go back and look at the boys. Let's go back to verse 38 and look at the interaction that Jesus has with the disciples. Verse 38, again, he says, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay here and watch with me." Stay here and watch with me. I need a friend. I need someone who cares. I need someone I can talk to about my discussion with the Father. And I need you to hear this, to learn, to understand. I need you to be part of this with me. He is being attacked. He is in great distress. And he's asking the disciples, please watch with me. Verse 40, then he came to his disciples and found them sleeping. And he said to Peter, what? You could not watch with me for 1 hour? Now our human selves say, well, wait a minute. These disciples have been up for 24 hours probably at this point. If you remember, this has been a full day. And they've had a tough day. They're very disappointed in what's going on. Jesus, is going to die. They've been told that, they're going to desert him. They're feeling pretty beat down. But as CT would say, yeah, but compared to what Jesus is going through, it's nothing. Now, it's interesting, in Luke, it says that they were asleep because of sorrow. Another way to say that is they cried themselves to sleep. They were in such distress themselves that they just crushingly fell to sleep. But here you see Jesus's response, Peter, couldn't you wait and watch with me 1 hour? I think you have here the sleeping disciples only added to his sorrow, right? To his disappointment. No one would pray for him. No one would even pray for themselves. They're all going to desert him. And what they've been asked to do is, compared to what he is about to do, is a drop in the bucket. And what's interesting here is they're sleeping in the crisis moment of eternity. The big moment, the whole world-changing moment of eternity, and they're asleep. Satan is active. The demons are not asleep. All hell is breaking loose on Jesus, and these guys are asleep. Verse 41. He says, then watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. The spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. Watch and pray that you not fall into temptation. In other words, I am being tempted like crazy. Satan is all around. You guys better watch out. If you really, Peter, say you're not going to deny me, you're not going to deny me, you're not going to deny me, well, you better pray and be ready. And of course, we know they didn't, and they fell because of it. The spirit and the flesh here are in conflict, and the flesh is winning. And the flesh will always win without watching and praying. Watching and praying. It's interesting to me, that last phrase, the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. I think at first, in verse 40, what, could you not watch with me 1 hour? I kind of hear a irritation and disappointment in Jesus. But then when I get to 41, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I kind of hear a tenderness, oh man, your spirit is there. You want to do the right thing, but your flesh, you don't understand. You don't understand the depravity of your flesh. In your spirit, you really do believe you're going to be okay. You're going to make it. You can battle through. And sure, you can take a little nap, no big deal. But you don't know the flesh. You don't know what's about to happen. I just find it interesting. You see the compassion of Jesus in the midst of all this stuff. All right, let's go down to verse 45, and we kind of bring now the disciples and Jesus together in this discussion. Verse 45, then he says, then he came to the disciples. So now this is after the third time. He came to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Are you still sleeping and resting? I've come back to you. Wait, I skipped over something. Well, that's really important. I skipped over verse 43. Didn't I? Yeah, let's go back to 43. So the second time, I skipped to the third time. Let's go to the second time. He came and found them asleep again, for their eyes were heavy. So he left them, went away again, prayed the third time, saying the same words. So he comes to them a second time, and he finds them again asleep. And what's interesting to me here is that he doesn't wake them up. He doesn't say anything to them. Why not? Why doesn't he wake them up the second time and say, hey guys, wake up. Don't you understand? Why do you think he doesn't?
Well, like you said earlier, that his tone was understanding that in their flesh they're weak. So maybe there's compassion and understanding that they just, their flesh possibly.
Yeah, I think there's two things going on here, Debbie, and I think that is definitely one of them. And that is, what's amazing here is to see the mercy and love of God in the midst of the worst of possible times, right? Jesus is going through the worst of possible times in his whole life, in the garden, battling with Satan, in deep sorrow unto death, and he still has mercy and love for the disciples. What? I mean, it's overwhelming to me, the love and mercy of God in that response. The second thing I would say that's going on here is Jesus is battling Satan. Yeah. And he's moved from take this cup from me if you can, to okay, if this cup has to come, thy will be done. I think he's beyond human consoling. He's beyond the need of the disciples at this point. And he is facing the reality of, no, I'm going to have to handle this by myself. I'm going to have to go to that cross by myself. I'm going to have to take on the sin of the world by myself. There's no use in waking them up.
Yeah.
Interestingly, in Mark's version here, and the second time he comes to them, again, it doesn't say that Jesus says anything to them, but it says the disciples didn't know what to say to him. So it may be that they did wake up when he came, but he didn't say anything to them. He may have just looked at them, and they didn't know what to say to him. They're out of it. All right, so now let's go to verse 45. I apologize. He comes to the disciples now the third time, and he says, are you still sleeping and resting? To me, there's still a sense of disappointment, of sadness. You're still, I've come now 3 times, and you're still asleep. You're still not paying attention. But then the next word, behold, the hour is at hand. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of the sinners. Behold. I've told you, when he says the word behold, pay attention, right? This is a big word. Behold. Watch out. Hello. Wake up. Behold. What I see in this word is not Jesus in sorrow, not Jesus overwhelmed with grief, but Jesus now triumphant over Satan. Jesus has been battling with Satan 3 times. Satan's been saying, hey, let's do this another way. Let's do this another way. Certainly you're the Son of God. No way you should have to do this. Jesus keeps saying, no, thy will be done. Thy will be done. Thy will be done. And now he's there, right? Now the human Jesus and the godly Jesus are together. And he's saying, behold, now it's time to move. Behold, the hour is at hand. I just love the transition that we have in Jesus from this human, broken, sorrowful, overwhelmed, at the edge of death to now, behold. This is Jesus triumphant. The hour is at hand. He's won the victory over Satan during his prayer time. No more temptation comes to him. He's ready to face it all. He's prayed. You know, the other thing is, he's prayed his way to a perfect calm, a perfect resolve, perfect peace over the situation, right? He's prayed himself to that. He didn't change God's mind. That was not his intent in the prayer. The prayer was about getting him aligned with God's will. There's a lesson in that, right? He prayed his way till he was ready, he was calm, he was resolved to go. And then we see that in verse 46, right? Rise, let us be going. See, my betrayer is at hand, right? Arise, let's go. Behold, let's go. And, you know, I'll just flip there just because it's fun. Go to John chapter 18. John chapter 18. Verse, I'm in Luke, I'm never going to find it in Luke. John chapter 18, verse 36. John 18:36. I said, is that right? That is not right.
No.
Come on, people, let's get it together. No, John 18:4. I'm just not even looking at my notes. I'm just guessing what it is. John 18:4. Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that would come upon him, went forward and said to them, now this is when he's being arrested, whom are you seeking? And they answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said to them, I am. And Judas, who has betrayed him, also stood with them. Now when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. This picture, Jesus from the sorrowful, broken human to Jesus, the one who says, I am the I am. It's the I am who is he. And that the power of who he was enough that they all fell back and fell to the ground. I just, And where does he get all of that strength from? Where does he get all of that ability to stand, that ability to arise, that ability to go forth? Where does it come from?
God and that.
Father
prayer.
God.
Yeah, being in God's will.
Yeah, all of that, right? Spending the time in prayer, getting himself aligned with God's will, and all of a sudden, he's the one who is saying to the disciples, let's go, guys. He's not telling them, hey, scatter, get out of here, run. No, arise, let's go to them. Let's meet them. Let's meet the challenge that we have in front of us. We're ready for it. We're calm. We're at peace.
Him, though.
I'm sorry?
You said we, but it's really just him.
It's really just him. Yeah, you're right. It's him. So don't also miss the lesson in here for us, right? Which is, how do I deal with temptation? Go back to verse 41, which is the answer to that question. Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation. Watch and pray. Pay attention and spend time with God. Pay attention to what Satan is doing, to when Satan is active. Recognize him, recognize what he's doing, and then spend time with God. The other thing, if you remember back to the temptation in the wilderness, the way that Jesus dealt with temptation then was reciting scripture right? He knew the word and he threw it back in Satan's face. So those are the three things I would say when temptations come. You got to have the word in you. You got to have God's word buried in your heart. And then you got to be paying attention and watching and not asleep, not the whole world. The crisis of eternity is upon the disciples and they're not paying attention. Are you paying attention? That's the question. Are you watching? Are you looking to see what Satan is doing in your life, in your family's life, in your friends around you? Are you watching and then praying? And then praying, and then going back a second time and praying, and then going back a third time and praying until you're at peace, until you're calm, until you have a resolve to do God's will. The flesh is miserably weak. And somehow we think, I can just handle this. I can do it. I'll get up enough strength and I'll overcome whatever this is. The flesh is miserably weak. You cannot stand on good intentions. There's an interesting comparison between the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Gethsemane. Right? In the Garden of Eden, we have the temptation of man and man falls, and then we have sin for all eternity. In the Garden of Gethsemane, we have temptation and Jesus stands. Then we have salvation for all eternity. These two gardens are pretty important. So again, I want to say, yes, there's an important lesson in here for us about temptation. But more important to me today is that you get a grasp of the sorrow that Jesus went through. You get a grasp of the sorrow unto death that Jesus went through. Now, by the way, this is in the garden, which is followed by the cross, which is some immeasurably amount more sorrow and suffering than he's even going through here in the garden. Here we cannot even measure the sorrow he's going through in the garden. When he gets to the cross, it becomes even more immeasurable and more overwhelming. And you know, you may ask, how did Jesus die? Did he die from asphyxiation? But that's the way normal people died under crucifixion, right? Their arms were held up and they would die because they couldn't breathe any longer, right? Did he die because they pierced a sword in his side? Neither of those things are true. It takes days for someone to die of asphyxiation. He died very quickly on the cross. The guards were shocked that he was still alive. Remember, they went to break his legs and they said, well, he's already dead. We don't need to break his legs so he will die. They stabbed the spear in to prove that he was already dead. How did Jesus die? What did he die of?
He gave up his life. He ended it.
Yes. Any other thoughts? So, go ahead.
I was gonna say, doesn't God always determine the time of our death down to
Sure.
mere? So didn't God time this as well?
Yes.
The sacrifice was made, the debt was paid, and
So was it done?
it was finished. That's when it was time for him to give up his life. End his life.
So how did it happen?
Gave it up. Gave it up.
Yeah, we don't know, but here's what I like to think. However, I think the suffering unto death that he had to have an angel come to help him stay alive in the garden. I think on the cross, he suffered unto death. He died of a broken heart.
Yeah.
His heart exploded. He died on the cross. Yes, God took it away. God took it at the right time. God, all that. But I think you're seeing the beginnings here of the brokenness unto death that occurs on the cross. It's just, I don't have any, I don't have anything to back that up other than I think it makes sense. All right. Any other thoughts on this? I know it's a kind of a sorrowful lesson to leave you with, but that was my intent. Anything else on this? Any other thoughts?
The enormity of being separated from God. That's what happens to non-believers. That's what happens for eternity. And yeah, he had to do that.
Yeah.
But today's certificates have a place that they mark how the death occurred, and one of them is natural causes. I think you would have to say this was unnatural causes. There was nothing natural about it. It was all God, his timing. Man had nothing to do with it. Man did not take his life away, regardless of what they did to him. Torture, all that. You couldn't even say it contributed and be that would allude to how he died.
Yeah. Anything else?
Yeah, I think, Rich, that going back to the basics of being a believer, anytime you are going to do God's will, there's going to be a battle. And there are going to be deeper and more profound battles in life that require prayer and time spent with the Lord, seeking his will. And I think that sums up what it means to be a believer. And Jesus exemplified that in what he went through.
Yep. We ought to be battling.
Yeah.
That old saying, if you haven't met Satan on the road today, maybe it's because you're going in the same direction he is. All right, we're going to move to prayer. Hugh has left us. How dare he do that? So I'm going to take the prayer request here, and I'll lead the prayer at the end. So please say your name when you pray, because some of you I can't see on camera. So
Turn off the recording.
Turn off the recording. See, nobody said turn off the recording last week because Patty wasn't here. Because we did.